2017-18 we expect would be addressing three main issues. One being the additional revenues garnered on account of the income disclosure scheme. The second, the expenditure allocations based on the assessment for the economy as there appears to be a slowdown in growth post-demonetization. Lastly, the adherence to the FRBM norms in spirit, whether to maintain the 3% fiscal deficit target. The starting point for the budget would be the overall growth expectations for the year. This number would form the basis of reckoning of all tax revenues, which in turn will help determine the expenditure that can be accommodated. The Central Statistical Organization's estimate for FY17 without considering demonetization is lower at 7.1% compared to the 7.6% in FY16. CARE's own expectation this year is that growth would be 6.7 to 6.8% after considering the disruptions following demonetization. Keeping this in view, we have made some basic macro assumptions for 2017-18 such as nominal GDP growth of 11 to 11.5%, which will be the basis for the fiscal deficit calculations. Real GDP growth of 7.5%, which is the inherent growth in the economy. Inflation deflator of 3.5 to 4%, which is the rate at which the real economic growth rate is scaled up. Industrial growth of 5%, which provides an idea on excise collections. Growth in imports of 10 to 12%, which is related to customs revenue. We also expect the RBI to lower repo rates by 50 bips during the year, and the gross fiscal deficit target to be maintained at 3.3% of GDP. While in the 2017-18 budget, the development thrust will be on infrastructure, some rebalancing on social schemes could also be expected. In terms of taxation, changes for individuals and corporates too are expected. Anuja will now take you through CARE's expectations for revenues in the 2017-18 budget.
The revenue receipts were budgeted at 13.77 lakh crores for FY17, with the tax revenue at rupees 10.54 lakh crores and non-tax at rupees 3.22 lakh crores. The government is expected to meet these estimates, while the finance minister is confident that they'll end up with higher revenues on account of both direct and indirect taxes. For the FY18 budget, we expect natural buoyancy in the indirect taxes to continue, with the economic growth picking up and industry expected to perform better, resulting in improvement in overall sentiments. However, there is a delay expected in the implementation of GST, which will come in July 1st, based on the most recent deliberations. Since FY14, there have been multiple hikes in the crude oil duties. We are expecting the crude oil duty to be reduced in this budget if the crude oil prices see an increase. There is an expectation on hike in taxes on alcohol and tobacco products and increase in duties on luxury goods. Under the corporate taxation, the union budget is likely to lower the corporate tax since the finance minister in its 2015 budget had laid a roadmap to reduce the tax rate from 30% to 25% over the next 4 years. Nothing of this had been done in the past budget, so we are expecting this budget to take the first step in this direction, and the rate may be lowered to 27.5%. The MAT rate is also expected to be brought down to 15% from the current 18.5%. There's an expectation of increase in the rate of tax for short-term capital gains to be reduced from 17.5% to 15%. Under the individual taxation, we are expecting the tax exemption to be raised from rupees 2.5 lakh to rupees 3 lakh. This would provide benefit to the lower income group. The tax slabs are likely to be widened without the rates being changed. So we're expecting the tax slabs to be 10% for rupees 3 lakh to 6 lakh, 20% for rupees 6 lakh to 10 lakh, and 30% for above 10 lakh, which remains unchanged. Also, senior citizens would receive an additional interest from the schemes announced by the Prime Minister. Under the scheme, senior citizens would receive a fixed interest rate of 8% for a period of 10 years on deposits of up to rupees 7.5 lakh, and the interest would be paid monthly. Now, currently, the deduction under the interest on housing loan stands at rupees 2 lakh, which is expected to be increased to rupees 2.5 lakhs to provide a boost to the working class as well as the real estate sector. There were two income disclosure schemes announced by the government. The first one ended in September 2016. The first ideas disclosures of around 60,000 crores were made, which would yield around rupees 30,000 crores for the government in the form of tax income. This would be accrued in 3 installments, of which 25% were supposed to come in by November 2016, and another 25% is expected by March, while the balance would be expected by September 2017. The IDS 2 was introduced in December 2016 after the demonetization move, which levied a tax of 50% for the disclosure made. In case of the dodging of tax authorities, a penalty of 85% would be charged. Now, if the amount coming through the IDS 2 could be between 1 to 2 lakh crores, the government is expected to earn around rupees 50,000 to 1 lakh crores. Tax revenue in the form of indirect taxes. GST rates were fixed in the slabs of 5%, 12%, 18%, and 28% for the goods. The tax rate on services under GST is yet to be decided. We all know the present rate of service tax is around 15%, and we expect the services to be taxed between 12% and 18%, depending on its classification based on essential and non-essential services as we move towards the final GST rate. The non-tax revenues were budgeted at 3.22 lakh crores in FY17. Most of the non-tax revenue comes in the form of surplus from the RBI, while dividends from public sector enterprises. The surplus from the RBI we are expecting to remain steady in the FY18 budget, while dividends from the PSCs would be impacted, resulting in a shortfall of around rupees 7,000 to 8,000 crores. The government had targeted rupees 98,995 crores from the spectrum auction in FY17. For FY18, we expect the same to be lower at around 50,000 crores. The government has provided some hints on no immediate plan to conduct another round of auctions in near future. Now I would like to hand it over to my colleague Rucha to take over the revenue expenditure.
Thank you, Anuja. Let me all take you through the CARE's expectation on revenue expenditure. In FY17 budget, the revenue expenditure was rupees 17.31 lakh crore. In this year's budget, that is in FY18, we expect it to grow by 10 to 15%. This increased expenditure would be on account of increased payment towards higher borrowings of the central government, interest rate subventions, implementation of the 7th pay commission, along with one rank one pension scheme which has been introduced recently. However, this increase in the expenditure could also be offsetted by lower subsidies on the fertilizers and food. The expenditure of the central government on social schemes like Manarega, which is Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, is expected to increase by 10% in budget FY18. To throw some light on interest payments could increase, the expenditure of interest payments could increase by 4 to 4.5% in FY18. The gross borrowings are expected to increase from rupees 6 lakh crore in FY17 to rupees 6.53 lakh crore on account of which the interest payment could increase by rupees 22,000 crore. The MSS bonds of rupees 6 lakh crore if are going to continue in the next year. In that case, the interest burden could increase by rupees 39,000 crore additionally in FY18. However, we expect that only a part of this amount would flow back uh, into loans or invested in the new gross borrowings of the government. Next, I talk on expenditure on subsidies. We expect the expenditure on subsidies to moderate marginally and to be at around 1.8 or 2% of the GDP in FY18 from earlier 2.1% of GDP in FY17. Food subsidy is expected to be constant around 1% of GDP at rupees 1.4 or 1.5 lakh crore. In addition, the Food Corporation of India has demanded additional 7,000 crore while the state agencies have asked for rupees 2,000 to 3,000 crore towards the food subsidy in FY18 budget. Thus, the aggregate food subsidy could increase by 7% in FY18 budget if these demands are to be met. The fuel subsidy is expected to increase to rupees 30,000 crore in FY18 budget, which is 11% higher than the last year budget on account of expected increase in oil prices, with key oil producing countries deciding upon cut in production. The budget could consider crude oil price at as $60 per barrel, which is $10 per barrel higher than the price which was considered in the last budget. The fertilizer subsidy is expected to remain constant at around rupees 70,000 crore. However, it could also lower marginally as the process of rationalization begins and state elections in prominent agrarian states are approaching. Interest subsidy in FY17 budget was not significant. However, the PM's speech on 31st December addressed the issues of interest rate subvention on home loans for poor. He announced that 4% interest subsidy will be given on housing loans up to rupees 9 lakh and 3% on housing loans up to rupees 12 lakh. Housing loans account for nearly 12% of the outstanding bank credit, and therefore there could be additional interest subsidy of around rupees 6,000 to 7,000 crore in FY18 budget. In FY17, the pensions increased by 29% to rupees 1.23 lakh crore in FY17 on account of one rank one pension scheme along with 7th pay commission implementation. The 7th pay commission has recommended 24% hike in the pensions. So therefore this could increase the revenue expenditure by nearly 2.5% on account of pensions. Now I hand it over to Ms. Anuja to take you through capital receipts.
The major components of capital receipts include market borrowing and receipts from the disinvestment. As mentioned earlier, we expect the gross market borrowing to increase to 6.53 lakh crores in FY18. The receipts from disinvestment were budgeted at rupees 56,500 crores for FY17, of which rupees 36,000 crores was by the way of minority stake sale. Now, out of this budgeted, the government raised rupees 23,528 crores, which include rupees 21,432 crores through minority stake sale and rupees 2096 crores through strategic disinvestment. Now for FY18, we expect the receipts from the disinvestment to be around rupees 50,000 to 55,000 crores.
Capital expenditure, CARES expectations. Demonetization has had an adverse impact on the growth of the economy, and therefore the strong government spending is required in order to boost the economy. Therefore, we expect greater outlay of capital expenditure with major focus on roads and railways. Therefore, the capital expenditure is likely to increase from rupees 2.35 lakh crore in FY17 to around rupees 2.75 lakh crore in FY18 budget. The capital outlay for railways could increase by 22% to rupees 55,000 crore. Roads, the expenditure is expected to increase by around 15% to rupees 20,000 crore. On the other hand, urban development expenditure is expected to increase by 30% to rupees 15,000 crore. The receipts from IDS 1 and IDS 2 will be utilized towards the infrastructure spending like roads and railways. The increased allocation towards increased allocations could also be used for recapitalization of the banks. In FY16 budget, the government made provisions of rupees 70,000 crore towards the recapitalization of banks for 5 years. The PM in his December speech also mentioned that there would be a contribution of rupees 20,000 crore to NABARD fund. This fund is expected to provide farmers better access to loans from cooperative banks and societies. Now I hand it over to Kavita.
Coming to the fiscal deficit, fiscal consolidation roadmap is to be adhered to going forward also. Fiscal deficit is likely to be lowered for FY18 from the current fiscal's 3.5%. Gross fiscal deficit is to be contained at 3% in FY18. This target could be attained despite the increase in expenditure that is likely to be announced in the budget and the higher interest payments on account of higher borrowings. The government would be able to meet the expenditure from the additional income that is likely to earn from during the year with demonetization, bringing the unaccounted economy into the mainstream standardized system, resulting in increased accountability, transparency, and taxation. The lower government borrowings would have implications for the bond market, which has seen a persistent fall in yields in the current fiscal. The 10-year G-SECs have been in the range of 6.2 to 6.8% in the last 3 months. The surpluses of the banking system are being transferred to government borrowings, and this is likely to continue till credit demand picks up. Lastly, the yields can be expected to be largely stable in the range of 6.2 to 6.3%. The RBI's policies in the future will provide further direction to these movements. With this, we conclude our webinar, and in about 2 minutes, we will be ready to take questions.
Thank you, Kavita, Anuja, and Rucha. Dear participants, now we'll be taking a break of 2 minutes before we come back to take your queries. You are requested to start keying in the questions in the slot provided. I repeat, we'll be taking a break of 2 minutes before we come back to start our Q&A session. You are requested to start keying in your questions in the slot provided. Thank you. Thank you, participants. Now we'll begin our Q&A session. The first question is from Adil Lari. He's asking how will the government garner 50k crores with respect to the stake and strategic sale in FY18, and what major disinvestments will it conduct?
Yeah, thank you, Adil, for your query. With regard to the government's disinvestment, we have seen that the government has not been able to attain its target for disinvestment in the past, and even though they are likely to give a target of 50,000 crores for FY18, we do not expect them to meet this target. With regard to the major investments which might be conducted, it would again be minority stake sales in CPSEs, the announcements of which will happen in the due course. Thank you.
Hi, Adil is again asking, will the government be able to maintain fiscal deficit of 3% considering ORP and its interest and food subsidies?
Yeah, the government will maintain its fiscal deficit target. It could be 3%, or if the FRBM committee does give it some flexibility, it could be a little higher. But whatever the target, the government is likely to maintain that target. And even though there will be higher expenditure in terms of OROP and interest and other subsidies, because with the unaccounted economy coming into the formal standardized system, there would be an increase in accountability, transparency, and the taxation. So this increase in revenue will be able to meet these increase in expenditure. Thank you.
We have a query from Ms. Bhageshri. She's asking, will there be any impact on fuel subsidies due to an increase in oil prices?
Yes, there could be an increase in fuel subsidy if crude oil prices do increase considerably. We have seen that in the recent past there has been an increase in crude oil prices, and the government could probably target a price of around $60 per barrel. And in case there is an increase in prices beyond that, there could be an impact on fuel subsidies. This would be done with the aim of maintaining inflation below its target. an increase in capital expenditure can impact which are
We have a query from Mr. Yogesh Shah. He's asking, will RBI stay put on its on this interest rate in the upcoming policy?
The RBI's monetary policy is driven by inflationary movement. We've seen that the inflation has been coming down, so we are expecting a 25 basis points cut in the policy review, which is due on Feb 8th.
I think that we bring to our end to our Q&A session. Thanks again for all participants for taking their time out and being a part of this Care Ratings webinar. We hope the discussion was insightful and look forward to your participation in future also. As your screen shows, for any further queries or feedback, please write to us at corp.com@careratings.com. I repeat, for further queries or feedback, please write to us at corp.com, that is corp.com @careratings.com. Goodbye for now.